Okay, so now, briefly, we're going to kind of address these ideologies that we just studied: liberalism, conservatism, nationalism, and socialism, being put into practice, or what it meant for those ideas to become, go off the pages into the streets, into the state apparatus, and so forth. Okay, so um, when you're looking at pages 692 to the end of the chapter, um, it can be a little bit overwhelming when you're not familiar with any of this to kind of try to follow all these things going on. I want you to read carefully this section as much as possible. And then, so what I'm going to do, instead of trying to break down each conflict, I want to kind of point out what was significant to just keep in mind about those and why they're relevant. So first of all, I would make an argument that World War I and World War II really are best explained by these backdrops, okay? By coming into the 19th century during these times. And we see that World War I and World War II are trying to create some resolution over the issues that get addressed that we see in this last section, and into a certain extent into the next chapter. And that when it comes to the attempts, I mean, so think about the creation of the EU and this and the state that Europe is in now is really a very different kind of Europe than it was up until World War II. And to a certain extent, there's a question: will it last? Will it ever disintegrate again back into where it's at? And I always make this point because my emphasis of my history, my strength is in Middle East history. I always point out that while the Middle East, or you look at parts of Africa, looks so chaotic and just like war after war, people say, well, why are they killing each other? Look at what's going on in Syria. And this seems so foreign to us. I always want to remind everyone that, Americans, we just had a civil war in the 19th century. It's not that long ago, okay? And I believe the last Civil War bride died in my lifetime. She was in her hundreds, and she was like a really young girl that married a really old Confederate general. It was kind of one of those weird things, but I mean, but that was possible, okay? And we over half a million people died here, killing each other over our issues, slavery, right, and our secession. Europeans have been killing each other for a very long time, in case you haven't noticed. Look at all this, and you look, and they're trying to resolve different things at different periods of time. And so while we look at Western civilization in its very classical, pristine way, think about how much of bloodshed and struggle that various camps have been making to try to stabilize and create that ideal world, that everybody had these ideals, but they weren't necessarily put into reality. Now, so having said that, we see liberalism as we defined it back then, creating revolts where you have certain elites that want to, reassert themselves at the expense of the monarchies, and you have the conservatives maintaining power, okay? And you have the concert of Europe, for example, was it discussed here on 693, the joint efforts made by Austria, Prussia, Russia, Britain, and France during the years following the Congress of Vienna to suppress liberal and nationalist movements throughout Europe. So, again, the idea of nationalism was seen as anti-conservative because monarchism was multicultural, multi-ethnic empires, right, under a monarchy. And again, that's not something that people always think about, okay? And so let's take a look at Greece. Greece is kind of an interesting case. Greece has always been the ideal of the West, right? The legacy of the Western world, especially since the Renaissance, people have been aware, is Greece and Rome. And Greece was long under the Ottoman Empire, under the Muslims. And as nationalism and liberalism was influencing and to a certain extent romanticism, but in the case of Greece, nationalism, they started to revolt. And this was seen as an inspiration in a kind of exotified sense by even many Europeans. If you looked here, you'd see that the poet Lord Byron, he wrote the famous poem "She Walks in Beauty Like the Night, with cloudless climes and starry skies." And he was quite a player, if you will, one of the probably the last rock star poets. He was going to go off and do this romantic thing, go fight on the side of Greek civilization against the Islamic world, the non-Western Islamic Turks. And you were going to see support from Percy Shelley. That was the poet who was married to Mary Wollstonecraft's daughter, Mary Shelley, who wrote Frankenstein. And you saw painters kind of sympathizing with the Greeks. Now, this, as you saw on chapter 694, created a sort of complicated set of interests that contradicted each other. And we should never forget that in politics and global politics, that interests conflict with each other and create confusion. So you have these conservative nations that want to preserve monarchies and that don't want to support nationalist liberal revolts, but they're also totally opposed and against to the Ottoman Turks. And so they're going to support the Greeks. And this is going to basically kind of cause them problems, because they're going to successfully create an independent Greece by supporting an ideology that they're actually trying to suppress in their own home front. Okay? And this is not an unfamiliar thing. Nasser of Egypt was arresting his communists while he was supporting communists in Yemen in the 60s. This is politics, okay? And we shouldn't be surprised. And that's why I always want to emphasize that, especially as historians, we see ideologies and we try to understand them, and we also try to always understand where ideologies are just ideologies, and then actions and what are really taking place don't always coincide with those things. Okay, and this is sometimes, I think, what is missed by political science. Sometimes people who are educated about ideologies at the expense of actually the history of things miss those points way too much. And that's, I think, a problem. Just want to point that out. Okay, so also, we're seeing in Russia, there's already liberals there who are trying to revolt against their monarchy. So keep in mind, the communist revolution is going to happen in World War I. We know this now. We didn't know this then, but Russia is going to be having a series of revolts and complications that the Russian Revolution is going to have a context to the communist revolution. Okay. Again, here's the romantic painting. And we say romantic, the heroism, the kind of celebration. This is a piece to really create sympathy towards the Greeks against the Turks, and it really works, right? By the way, many of you may not know, Greece, the complex legacy of modern Greece. There were more Greeks living outside of Greece in the Turkish peninsula than there was in Greece itself when it originally was independent. And later on, the Greeks are going to try to reclaim Greater Greece at the expense, and what's going to happen is a massive ethnic cleansing of Greeks from Turkey, and Turks being ethnically cleansed from Greece in the modern 20th century in a very tragic way. The history of modern Greek politics is a really complex one, and if you pay attention to global politics now, they're kind of on the outs with the whole economic system things. But the ancient Greece and what we know of ancient Greece and the issues dealing with modern Greece are very different. Just as I would argue the same thing about ancient Israel and modern Israel. So sometimes people are too focused on the ancient history. Same with Egypt. Everybody sees the pyramids and the pharaohs. Well, Egypt is one of the largest Arabic-speaking Muslim majority countries now, and it's been for a while. So we got to get up with the program and start following where things are at now. Anyways, okay, so ideological encounters in Europe. As you saw with France, France goes through so much. And I mean, look at the violence we see in Syria and Iraq now, and think about France. What's the difference? I mean, there's differences, but I mean, think about it. We had, you had these white terror, as it was called, and some policemen that were nicknamed Three Slice and what, Four Slices, indicating the number of pieces in which they had butchered Protestant enemies. Again, this is a lot of brutality that we don't associate with Western world now. Okay, and you had the Polish also trying to rebel and create their own nation. Belgium is mentioned. Okay, I'm just going to. I want you to read those, but I want you to see here on this map, all of these revolts, and they go up into 1848. They were once termed the Spring of Nations. The Arab Spring that happened recently, if you followed that at all, was often compared to this time. There was all these revolts taking place, and they were basically squished. They've all been pretty much crushed now, and failed in the many ways that the European ones did. But you see people trying to break out of a status quo, and you see the old world orders really working hard to preserve their power, just like now. Okay, so I'll stop here, and then I'll expand onto Britain as well.